$60. She will be dead by Christmas anyway. Might as well get the use. The crowd roared with laughter as the mayor of Pine Ridge auctioned off a poor Boston girl right there in the town square. She stood on that wooden platform in November of 1878, 23 years old, 2,000 miles from home, with nothing but a leather Bible pressed against her chest. The bidding climbed to $100. Her face did not move. Inside, her heart was breaking. Then somewhere in the distance, the sound of hooves came down the main street at a gallop. A black gelding, 16 hands at the shoulder, and on its back a man 6'7" in a long bear fur coat with eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. The mayor did not know it yet. The crowd did not know it yet. But the girl they were laughing at was about to become the most powerful woman in Colorado Territory. And the man they were about to mock was going to bring their entire town to its knees before the snow melted. Friend, pull your chair closer to the fire. Let me tell you the whole story. They called it a joke. The men of power in Pine Ridge, Colorado Territory in the bitter winter of 1878 thought they had been mighty clever. Mayor Cornelius Ashford, with his polished boots and his snake smile, decided to sell a poor Boston girl to 3 wild mountain men up in the high country. Men the town whispered about. Men, they said, had killed their own family to claim the land. The crowd laughed when the frail girl climbed onto the wagon without a single tear. They expected her to die in the snow before Christmas, but they did not know Beckett Hawthorne, and they certainly did not know Adelaide Whitmore. Sometimes the stone a man throws away turns out to be the diamond he has been hunting his whole life long. Now, friend, before we get any further into this story, do me one small favor. If you love these old frontier tales, hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm to share this story with more folks who need it. Now then, pull your chair closer to the fire. Let me tell you how it all began. The wind moved through the high pines of Silver's Pine Valley like an old grief that never quite left. Inside a great log lodge built 3 stories high against the mountain, a man sat alone at a heavy oak table. The lamp before him burned low. Outside, the first real snow of the season fell soft and quiet against the tall windows. Beckett Hawthorne lifted a tin cup of black coffee to his lips. His right hand trembled. Just a little, not from fear. He had stopped fearing most things by his 20th year, and he was now 33. No, the tremor came from memory. The fever had taken him in January of 1877, only 10 months past. Typhoid. It came in the night and laid him out on the cot in the back room. He remembered nothing of the first 3 days, bits of the next 4. He had called out for his mother. Catherine Hawthorne had been dead 12 years by then, but in the heat of the sickness, his mind sent him back to childhood. He cried for her like a boy. There was no one to hear. Holden was 3 days north on a hunting trail. Rhett was in Denver buying medicine that arrived too late to matter. Henrietta Whitlock, the housekeeper, who had served the family since before Beckett could walk, was visiting her daughter in Cheyenne. The lodge was empty. The fire died. The wolves came down from the ridge and circled the property for 2 nights running. Beckett survived only because his body refused to surrender and because Dr. Green of Denver had finally arrived on the 4th day to find him barely breathing. Green was a good man, an honest man. He had sat by Beckett's bed for 9 straight days while the fever broke and the bones came back together. And on the morning Beckett finally sat up and asked for water, the doctor had spoken plain. "Beckett," he said, "I have known your family 18 years. I owe you the truth. Your body will not survive another winter alone. You need a wife. You need children. You need someone in this house who will hear you call out at night. I am not a man who gives advice on such matters, but I am giving it now." Beckett had not answered him then. Pride did not allow it. But that night, alone again, with only the wind for company, he had wept. Quietly, the way a grown man weeps when no one is watching. He had buried his mother and father in the same week, December of 1866. He had buried friends in the war before that. He had buried 2 good hounds and a roan mare he loved, and he had told himself year after year that solitude was a kind of strength. That night, he understood it for what it really was, a slow form of dying. Beckett set the cup down on the oak table. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, the snow thickened. Somewhere up on the high ridge, a wolf called once and went silent. He thought about his mother's piano in the locked room on the third floor. He thought about how no one had played it in 12 years. And he thought about the letter folded in his vest pocket. The letter that had come 3 weeks ago from a town 2,000 miles east, written in a careful school teacher hand. The letter that was about to change everything. Now, folks, let me take you east for a spell, all the way to Boston, Massachusetts. Because while Beckett Hawthorne sat alone in his great empty lodge, a young woman in a narrow boarding house room was making a decision that would carry her clear across the country and into his life forever. Adelaide Whitmore was 23 years old. The lamp in her room had burned down to a stub, but she did not light another. Lamp oil cost money. The boarding house mistress had given her 1 week, 7 days to find 5 months of back rent or be turned out into the cold streets along with her dying mother and her 2 younger siblings. Adelaide sat on the edge of the iron cot. Her mother Phoebe lay beside her breast shallow and rattling a fresh stain of blood in the handkerchief in her thin fingers. The same disease that had taken Henry Whitmore 2 winters back was now taking his wife. Consumption, the doctor had called it. He had charged $5 to give it that name and offered no cure beyond rest and clean air, neither of which they could afford. In the corner, 8-year-old Iris and 10-year-old Wesley huddled together under a single wool blanket. Iris's small hand clutched the edge of her brother's shirt the way a drowning person clutches a rope. Wesley pretended to be asleep, but Adelaide could see his eyes shining in the dim light. He was old enough to know what was coming. He was too young to do anything about it. Adelaide rose and crossed to the cracked mirror nailed above the wash basin. The face that looked back at her was thinner than it had been a year ago. The honey blonde hair her father had once said reminded him of summer wheat. The cornflower blue eyes that her mother had told her were her finest feature. The straight nose, the small jaw, the soft mouth that had not smiled in months. She was not vain. There had never been time for vanity in the Whitmore house. Henry Whitmore had been a teacher of literature and a lover of books. He had taught his daughter French and a little German and how to play 3 Chopin nocturnes from memory. He had given her everything except money, and in dying he had left her a debt the size of a mountain. She picked up the small pair of scissors from the basin. She gathered the long, honey-colored braid that hung past her waist. She held it in her left hand. With her right she cut, slow, deliberate. The sound of the steel parting the hair was the loudest thing in the room. The braid came away heavy in her hand. She wrapped it in a clean cloth and set it on the dresser. The wig maker on Tremont Street paid $4 for hair that long and that fair. $4 would buy them 4 more days, maybe 5. But 4 days would not save them. She knew that. She had known it for weeks. Adelaide reached under the loose floorboard beneath the cot and drew out a small folded square of newsprint. She had cut it out of a discarded paper she had found behind the bakery 3 weeks earlier. She unfolded it now and read the words again, though she had memorized them long since. Wanted. Honest woman of marriageable age, sound of mind and body, willing to make a home in the high country of Colorado Territory. Travel arranged. No experience required, only a willing heart and steady hands. Reply to B. Hawthorne, General Delivery, Pine Ridge. She had read those words 100 times. She had folded the paper and unfolded it. She had put it back beneath the floor and taken it out again. She had told herself she would never. She had told herself she had no choice. Tonight, in the smell of her dying mother's labored breath and the silence of her hungry siblings, she made the decision at last. Adelaide sat down at the small table beneath the window. She drew a single sheet of paper from her father's old writing case. She dipped the pen in what was left of the ink, and in the careful school teacher hand her father had taught her, she began to write. Sir, my name is Adelaide Whitmore. I am 23 years old. I am the daughter of a teacher who is now deceased. I have a mother who is gravely ill and a brother and sister who are very young. I have nothing in this world except a willingness to work and the small skills my mother taught me. I do not seek rescue. I seek a place where I can stand on my own feet and earn my keep with my own hands. If a woman like me can be of use to you, write back and I will come. She signed her name. She read it once. She sealed it. She did not weep. Weeping was for women who still had the luxury of it. The next morning, Adelaide took the letter and the cut braid down to Tremont Street. She sold the hair for $4 and used part of the money to post the letter. Then she walked home through the gray Boston cold and did not allow herself to hope. The reply came 2 weeks later. It was a thick envelope heavy in her hand. Inside was a letter written in a man's hand. Strong, plain, no flourishes. And folded inside the letter were 10 $20 banknotes. $200, more money than Adelaide had held in her entire life. The letter was short. Miss Whitmore, your letter found me at the right hour. The enclosed sum should settle your immediate debts and pay your passage west. A train ticket to Pine Ridge has been wired to the Boston station in your name. Come when you are ready. I will meet you. There is one thing you must know before you arrive. Silver Pine Valley is not a place for the weak of heart. If you come, you should know that there are matters concerning my family I cannot put in this letter. I will speak of them when we meet face to face. Until then, you have my word that you will be treated with respect under my roof. Yours, B. Hawthorne. Adelaide read the letter 3 times. Her hand shook on the third reading. But what hooked her, what made her sit down hard on the cot and stare at the paper for a long while, was a small line he had written near the bottom. Almost an afterthought. He had read her letter so carefully that he had quoted one of her own sentences back to her. Underlined 3 times in the same plain pen. I do not seek rescue. I seek a place where I can stand on my own feet. Beneath that, in his own hand, he had written 4 words. That is enough, ma'am. Now, folks, that little line. Those 4 words. That was the moment Adelaide Whitmore knew deep in her bones that the man she was going to marry was either the best man she would ever meet or the most dangerous. There was no middle ground, and she would not know which until she was already 2,000 miles from anyone who could help her. She paid the rent. She moved her mother and the children to a smaller, cleaner room with a stove. She wrote to her Aunt Cordelia in Philadelphia, a woman she barely knew who had sent one letter at Henry's funeral and signed it with cool politeness. Adelaide wrote with all the dignity she had left and asked if Phoebe and the children could stay with her until Adelaide could send for them. To her surprise, Cordelia wrote back at once, yes, send them. The day before Adelaide left Boston, she did one last thing. She walked through the falling snows to a small, unfashionable square near the harbor. There was a bench there where her father used to take her on Sundays when she was a girl. She sat on the bench and watched her breath rise in the cold, and she said goodbye to him in her own quiet way. She told him she was going west. She told him she was scared. She told him she would not bring shame on his name no matter what waited for her there. When she rose to leave, she saw an old woman sitting on the far end of the bench. Adelaide had not seen her arrive. The woman wore a heavy gray shawl wrapped twice around her thin shoulders. Her hands were bare and red with cold. She looked up at Adelaide with eyes the color of weathered stone. Adelaide had only one warm wool scarf left in the world. Her mother had knit it. She unwound it from her own neck, walked to the old woman, and laid it gently across the thin shoulders. The old woman did not thank her. She only studied Adelaide's face for a long moment. Then she spoke. Child, she said, there are men in the high country who do not say much. But when those men choose someone, they choose forever. Go west. The mountains have been waiting on you. Adelaide stared at her. How do you know I am going west? The old woman smiled. It was not a kind smile, and it was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of a person who knew something she would not share. Go, she said, and mind yourself with the man who calls you home first. Adelaide walked away. When she reached the corner and looked back, the bench was empty. The scarf was gone. The snow had filled in any tracks the old woman might have left. Adelaide did not know what had happened on that bench. She did not know it for many months yet, but she would think about it more than once before this was over. The train from Boston to the Western Territories took 5 days. Adelaide rode in third class, sitting upright through the long nights, her single trunk wedged under the bench. She had never been more than 50 miles from Boston in her life. Now she watched the country unwind outside the window, like a story she could not quite read. The flat farmland of Pennsylvania, the dark forests of Ohio, the endless rolling prairies of Nebraska, where the wind never stopped and the grass moved like water. She slept little. She ate the bread and dried apples she had packed and refused to spend money on the meals at the depots. On the fourth day, somewhere west of the Great Missouri, a tall woman in a worn black traveling dress sat down across from her. The woman was perhaps 60 years old. Her hair was gray and her hands were rough. Her eyes were kind in a way that made Adelaide want to cry, though she could not have said why. "You are going far," the woman said. "Colorado Territory," Adelaide answered. "Mail order," Adelaide nodded. The woman was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "I have lived in the high country 30 years. I will tell you something for free, child. The men out there are not like the men in the cities. They speak less, they mean more. If a man takes off his hat in your presence and looks you in the eye, that man will never lift a hand to you. If a man laughs too loud and stands too close, walk away from him no matter what title he holds. I have seen mayors and sheriffs who were rotten to the heart. I have seen trappers in beaver coats who were the kindest souls I ever met. Watch the eyes, child. The mouth lies, the eyes do not." Adelaide thanked her. The woman left the train at the next stop and Adelaide never saw her again, but she remembered every word. On the fifth day, the train climbed up into the Rocky Mountains. The air thinned. The peaks rose white and enormous against the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Adelaide had never seen anything like it. She thought of her father who had never traveled west of Pittsburgh and how his eyes would have shone at this. She pressed her face to the cold window and did not move for an hour. The train pulled into Pine Ridge Depot just past 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Adelaide stepped down onto the wooden platform with her trunk in one hand and her father's old leather Bible in the other. The cold hit her like a slap. The wind out here had teeth. She drew her thin coat tighter and looked around for the man she had come to meet. She did not see him. What she saw instead was a crowd. A crowd of perhaps 80 people had gathered in the square just past the depot. Men in fur coats and tall hats, women in long wool dresses, children clinging to their mother's skirts. There was a wooden platform at the far end of the square, and on the platform stood 4 young women in pretty traveling clothes. They were younger than Adelaide. They were prettier. They were laughing nervously and waving at the crowd. A banner stretched above them read, "Pine Ridge Bride Day, 1878. A man in a black wool suit stood at the front of the platform. He was short and thick around the middle. His boots were polished to a hard shine. His hair was oiled back from a smooth, round face. When he smiled, his teeth were too even, too white, like a man who paid for them. He held a piece of paper in his hand, and he was reading names from it in a loud voice. A railroad porter touched Adelaide's elbow. "Miss," he said, "you are expected up there. The mayor is calling brides." Adelaide looked at him. "I was supposed to be met by Mr. Hawthorne." The porter shook his head. "Hawthorne ain't here yet. Mayor said you was to be presented with the others. Said it was the law of the town." Adelaide felt something cold move down her spine. It was not the wind. She walked across the square with her trunk and her Bible. The crowd parted for her, then closed behind her. She heard whispers. She heard a low laugh. She climbed the 4 steps to the platform and stood at the end of the line of bright young women. The other 4 girls turned and looked at her. One of them was kind. The other 3 were not. Adelaide kept her chin up and her eyes forward. The man in the black suit turned and looked at her. "Well now," he said. The word was thick with something Adelaide did not like. "And you must be Miss Whitmore, the lady from Boston. I was hoping you would arrive in time for our little gathering." He turned back to the crowd. He raised his voice. "Friends, as your mayor and as a man who looks out for the welfare of this town, I have a small announcement. Mr. Beckett Hawthorne of Silver Pine Valley was due to receive his bride here today. He has not arrived. Now I will not stand here and let a poor Boston girl freeze on a depot platform. So in the spirit of fair commerce, and in keeping with the established custom of this town, I will offer Miss Whitmore here to the highest bidder among you good men. The proceeds, of course, to go to the town treasury for the benefit of all. The crowd laughed. Someone whistled. A drunk in a stained coat at the back hollered, $50. She is a skinny little thing, but she will warm a bed. 60, another voice called. She will be dead by Christmas anyway. Might as well get the use. The crowd laughed harder. Adelaide stood very still. She did not look at the men. She did not look at the mayor. She looked straight ahead at a point above the crowd the way her father had taught her to look when other children mocked her for her cheap shoes at school. She held the leather Bible tight against her chest. Her left hand, hidden in the pocket of her coat, gripped the wool gloves her mother had knit her last Christmas. She held those gloves like a rope. Inside her heart beat hard. Outside her face did not move. The bidding climbed. $80, 100. The crowd grew louder. The mayor was smiling now in a way that told Adelaide this was the part he loved best. She understood in that moment, with a clarity that frightened her, that this man had not failed to deliver her to Mr. Hawthorne by accident. He had wanted this. He had planned this. And then she heard the hooves. A horse came down the main street at a gallop that was just short of dangerous. The crowd turned. The bidding stopped mid-sentence. Adelaide turned her head slow. The horse was a black gelding, 16 hands at the shoulder breadth, steaming in the cold. Two more horses followed close behind. The lead rider drew up at the edge of the square and swung down before the horse had fully stopped. Two more men dismounted behind him. Now, folks, let me draw this picture for you. Let me draw it slow, because this is the moment that everything changed for Adelaide Whitmore. This is the moment a young woman from Boston who had never seen anything bigger than a city dock worker looked up and saw what a real mountain man looked like for the first time in her life. He was tall, 6'7" by the look of him. He stood half a head above every other man in the square. He wore a long, bare fur coat that fell to his knees. Beneath it was a dark leather vest, a flannel shirt, and heavy work pants tucked into worn boots. A wide-brimmed hat sat low over his eyes. His beard was 2 days old. His skin was weathered from sun and wind and cold. His hair, what showed beneath the hat, was a deep chestnut brown. But it was the eyes that did it. They were the color of whiskey held up to firelight. Amber, maybe, hard as stone, steady as iron. They moved across the crowd once they found the mayor. They turned cold. Then they moved up to the platform. They found Adelaide, and they changed. She would think about that change for the rest of her life. The eyes did not soften exactly. They sharpened, as if the man behind them had just remembered why he had ridden so hard down from the mountain. As if the woman standing on that platform was the only thing in the whole frozen square that mattered to him. The two men behind him stood ready. One held a Winchester rifle low against his thigh. The other carried a black leather brick and stood with the easy balance of a man trained to fight or to heal depending on what the moment required. Adelaide would learn their names later. Holden, Rhett, the brothers. But in this moment, all she saw was the tall one, the one in the bear coat, the one whose eyes had found her and would not let go. The mayor stepped forward, recovering himself. He plastered the smile back on his round face. "Hawthorne," he said, "you are late." The tall man did not answer right away. He climbed the 4 steps to the platform with no haste at all. He came to stand before Adelaide. He took off his hat. His hair freed from it fell across his brow. He held the hat in both hands the way a man holds something he respects. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was low, very low. The kind of voice you hear in church when the preacher has known you since you were a boy and wants to tell you something true. "My name is Beckett Hawthorne. I am the man you wrote to. I am sorry for what is happening here. I am asking you as plain as I know how. Will you come with me?" Adelaide could feel the whole square watching. She could feel the 4 other brides watching from the platform, jealous now in a way she did not yet understand. She could feel the mare's smile cracking at the corners. She looked into the amber eyes of the tall man before her. She thought about the old woman on the bench in Boston, about the woman on the train. The mouth lies, the eyes do not. His eyes did not lie. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne," she said. Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be, but it did not shake. "I will come with you." He nodded once. Then with a small, careful motion, he lifted the heavy bear fur coat from his own shoulders and laid it gently around hers. The coat was so big it nearly swallowed her. It still held the warmth of his body. It smelled of pine smoke and cedar and the clean cold of the high mountains. "Ma'am," he said quiet, "you are home now." The mayor's voice cut across them sharp, now all the smoothness gone. "Hawthorne, the bidding had begun. By the laws of this town, you cannot simply arrive late," and Beckett did not look at him. He set a heavy leather pouch on the platform. The pouch landed with the dull weight of metal on wood. He opened it. Inside was gold dust in a small stack of double eagle coins. Enough to pay the highest bid in the square 10 times over. Enough to buy half the buildings on the main street. "I came at the time it was given," Beckett said. He still did not look at the mayor. He spoke to him the way a man speaks to a dog he does not particularly like. "Your town clock has run 30 minutes fast for 5 years. Every man, woman, and child here knows it. I am only the one who says it out loud." A few of the older men in the crowd grunted in surprise. One nodded slowly, another spat into the snow. The mayor's face went red. Beckett offered Adelaide his arm. She took it. They walked down the platform steps together. Holden and Rhett fell in behind them. The crowd parted again. This time the whispers were different. They were almost at the wagon when the mayor's voice rang out across the square, no longer smooth, no longer pretending. "Hawthorne," he called, "you think you can hide up on that mountain forever? Your land taxes are coming due in the spring. I have it on good authority that the Denver Bank will not be extending you any more time. Silver Pine Valley will belong to the territory before the snow melts. Mark my words." Beckett stopped walking. He turned around slow. The whiskey eyes went hard. "Ashford," he said. The mayor's name came off his tongue like a stone dropped in cold water. "I have paid those taxes for 12 years. My father paid them for 20 before that. I will pay them again this spring. As for you, there are some things in this life that money cannot buy. You would do well to remember which of those things you have already lost." He turned back. He helped Adelaide up onto the wagon seat. He climbed up beside her. The two brothers swung onto their horses. Beckett took the reins. As the wagon began to roll, Adelaide turned her head one last time and looked back at the square. The crowd was breaking up. The mayor was already walking away. But two men she had not noticed before were standing close beside Ashford, listening as he spoke low and fast. One of them lifted his head and pointed directly at the wagon. At her, the other man, a tall one with a thin scar across his upper lip, nodded once. Adelaide turned back. She did not say anything to Beckett. She did not know why. She only watched the road ahead. Later, she would wish with all of her heart that she had told him what she saw. But folks, that is how it is in stories like this one. The thing that comes back to hurt us hardest is almost always the thing we noticed and did not name. The wagon climbed out of Pine Ridge as the afternoon went gold. The road was rough packed dirt rutted by freight wagons. Pines crowded close on either side. The peaks rose ahead white and enormous. Adelaide sat beside Beckett on the wagon seat wrapped in the bear coat. Holden rode point on the black gelding. Rhett rode drag on a tall sorrel mare. Neither of the brothers spoke, neither did Beckett. The only sounds were the wagon wheels and the breath of the horse and the wind in the high pines. After perhaps an hour of climbing when the town was lost from sight behind a shoulder of rock, Beckett spoke at last. "I owe you an apology, Miss Whitmore." She turned her head to look at him. "I should have ridden in last night and slept at the depot," he said. But I had a calf sick, and the road slid out at Eagle Cut, and we had to take the long way down. I figured I had time. I underestimated Cornelius Ashford. That will not happen again. You know him well, then. Beckett did not answer for a long moment. The wagon climbed a tight switchback. The horses leaned into the harness. I know him about as well as a man can know another man, he said at last. And I will tell you about him, but not on the road. There are things I owe you the truth on. I will give you the whole of it when we are home. Home, the word sat strange in her ears. She had not had a home for a long time. That night they camped in a clearing where the road widened beside a creek. Holden killed a snowshoe hare with a single shot from 100 yards out. Rhett built the fire from hickory and pine. Beckett tended the horses. Adelaide watched them work. They moved around each other without speaking the way men do who have done the same work together 1,000 times. There was no waste in any of them. Beckett was clearly the elder. The two younger brothers deferred to him in 100 small ways without a single word of acknowledgement. When the meal was nearly ready, Adelaide rose quietly and walked a short way into the trees. She came back with her hands full of pale silver leaves she had spotted in the dusk. Wild sage. Her mother had grown it in a clay pot on their kitchen sill in Boston. She did not ask permission. She simply walked to the iron pot of beans Red had set over the fire and dropped a small handful of the chopped leaves in and stirred once and stepped back. Holden glanced at her. He did not say anything. A while later, when they had all dished up their plates, Holden took a spoonful of the beans. He stopped chewing. He looked up, his whiskey eyes the same color as Beckett's, but a shade lighter narrowed. Who did this to the beans? Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. I am sorry, I should have asked. My mother used to. Ain't complaining, ma'am. Holden's voice was rough but not unkind. I am asking because these are the best beans I have eaten in 6 months. What was that, Dom? Wild sage, she said, just a little. Beckett looked at her then. He looked at her for what felt like a long time. He did not smile, but something in his face changed. A line that had been hard along his jaw eased. He nodded once slow, as if confirming a thing to himself that he had begun to suspect. Red, the youngest of the three, who had spoken little so far, leaned forward across the fire. You said your mother taught you herbs. A little. My mother's father was a country doctor before the war. She kept his notes. Could I see them sometime? They are with my things. I will fetch them when we arrive. Rhett nodded, then he asked, careful and quiet, you know yarrow for wounds, lobelia for breath, valerian for sleep, and for nerves in small amounts. Rhett sat back. He looked at Beckett. Beckett looked at Adelaide. Ma'am, Beckett said, slow, you may turn out to be more useful in Silver Pine than even I had hoped. That night, Adelaide slept under a heavy wool blanket in the back of the wagon. She was warmer than she had been in 2 years. The sky above her was thick with stars she had never seen from the alleys of Boston. She thought she should be afraid. She was not. Somewhere off in the dark, she could hear the steady breathing of 3 men who had each in his own way set themselves between her and the world. She thought of her mother. She thought of Iris and Wesley sleeping safe in Philadelphia. She thought of the old woman on the bench. She thought of the man on the platform who had laid his bare coat across her shoulders and called her home. She slept. The next morning, deep in the second day of the journey, Adelaide did not sleep so easy. In the small hours before dawn, she heard a sound that cut through her dreams like a knife. A voice. A man's voice. Beckett's voice. Crying out. She came awake fast. She sat up in the wagon. The fire was low. Rhett was already up and moving toward the bedroll where Beckett lay. She heard Rhett speak low and steady. She heard the cry come again ragged, this time the voice of a man caught in something he could not wake from. Easy now, Rhett said. Easy. You are home. You are not there. You are home. Slowly the cries quieted. After a long while, there was only the sound of the wind in the creek and Beckett's breathing hard and uneven, slowing back to sleep. In the morning, Adelaide waited until Beckett had ridden ahead to scout the next pass. Then she walked to where Rhett was checking a buckle on the wagon harness. He has nightmares often. Rhett did not look up. He worked the buckle. After a long moment, he answered. He fought in the war, ma'am. He joined the Union Army in the spring of 1864. He was 19 years old. His regiment was at Sailor's Creek on the 6th of April, 1865, 3 days before General Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. He killed his first man on his 20th birthday. He killed several more in the hours after that. When he came home in the fall of that year, he was different. Our mother was the only one who could wake him from those dreams without him swinging at her. When she died 14 months later, he had to learn to wake himself. Adelaide did not speak. He is a good man, ma'am. Rhett's voice was very quiet now. But he has seen too much of dying. That is why he lives up on the mountain. That is why he does not trust easy. He has trusted no woman in 12 years. He paused. He looked up at her at last. His eyes were a softer amber than his brother's, kinder marked with something close to grief. Until your letter. My letter, Adelaide said. Rhett reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He drew out a folded piece of paper. The paper was already worn at the creases as if it had been opened and closed and opened again many times. It was her letter, the one she had written by the light of a dying lamp in a Boston boarding house. Beckett had been carrying it next to his heart. There is one line in there he reads again and again, Rhett said. He marked it, 3 times under it. Adelaide did not need to ask which line. I am telling you this, Rhett said, refolding the letter and putting it back in his coat, because in a few hours we will come over the last ridge and you will see Silver Pine Valley for the first time. And what you see is going to surprise you. My brother could have told you in a letter what waits for you up there. He chose not to. He wanted you to come because of what we are, not because of what we have. I want you to know that before you see it. He turned back to the harness. Adelaide stood very still in the cold morning. She did not know what he meant. She would not know for a few hours yet. But the small flame of fear she had carried since Pine Ridge Depot, the fear that this was all too strange and too sudden to be safe, that flame began to quiet. And in its place, something else began to grow. Late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, Beckett pulled the horses up on the high lip of a saddle pass between 2 stone walls. Adelaide had been dozing against his shoulder. He did not wake her at first. He let her sleep until the wagon stopped completely. Then he spoke her name once, very gentle. Miss Whitmore, you will want to see this. She opened her eyes. She rubbed them. She looked. Below them in the long, late gold light of a winter afternoon lay a valley. It was not what she had expected. A river ran through the heart of it, silver under the low sun. Green meadows lay on either side, even in winter. Pine forests climbed the slopes to the white peaks above. And in the very center of the valley, set against a low rise like something a careful man had spent his life building there, stood a great log lodge, 3 stories high, with stone chimneys at either end and broad porches wrapping around. Smoke curled from the chimneys. Lamplight glowed in a dozen tall windows. Around the lodge stretched barns and outbuildings and a long sawmill beside the river. Adelaide could see the small, distant figures of men moving between the buildings. There were perhaps 200 of them, perhaps more. Adelaide stared. She turned her head slow toward the man beside her. Mr. Hawthorne, you wrote to me that you were a mountain man. I am a mountain man, ma'am. You did not say you were. She could not finish the sentence. This is the Hawthorne Timber Company, Beckett said, quiet. My father started it the year before I was born. It is the 2nd largest timber operation west of the Mississippi. I run it now. My brothers run it with me. About 220 men work for us. Their families live in the cottages along the river. There is a school, a small chapel, a doctor's office where Rhett works 2 days a week. He was quiet a moment. I did not lie to you, ma'am. I am a mountain man. I am also a man with a great deal of land and money. Both are true. I did not write you about the second one because I have spent the last 6 years being courted by women in Denver who saw the second one and never bothered to look at the first. I needed a wife who would come for a mountain man. The rest is just an inheritance. Adelaide did not speak. She could not. He clicked to the horses. The wagon began to roll down the long, slow track into the valley. The light failed as they came down. By the time they pulled up at the front porch of the lodge, lanterns had been lit along the eaves. A tall, stout woman in a long apron stood at the top of the porch steps with her hands on her hips. Her hair was iron gray. Her face had the lines of 60 hard years and the strength of 40 more. This was Henrietta Whitlock. Beckett would tell Adelaide later that Henrietta had served in this house since 1843, that she had held Beckett the night he was born, that she had washed Catherine Hawthorne's body for burial. Henrietta looked Adelaide up and down once, quick, thorough, like a woman judging stock at market. Then she nodded. "Welcome home, Mistress Hawthorne." Adelaide started to correct her, to say she was not yet a mistress of anything, that she was only Miss Whitmore from Boston. But Henrietta had already turned and was leading her up the broad steps and into the great room beyond. So Adelaide simply followed. The great room was the largest single room she had ever stood in. The ceiling was 2 stories overhead. A massive stone fireplace took up most of one wall, the fire in it tall enough to warm the room from corner to corner. Bookshelves stretched along another wall. A long oak table sat near the fire with 12 chairs around it. A buffalo robe lay across a wide leather chair. The smell was cedar and pine smoke and lamp oil and something baking in the kitchen beyond. Adelaide stood in the doorway with the bare coat still hanging on her shoulders and felt something break open inside her chest. It was not quite grief and not quite joy. It was the feeling of a person who has been cold for so long that warmth, when it finally comes, hurts before it heals. Beckett came up behind her. He did not crowd her. He stood a respectful step back. "Your room is upstairs, ma'am. Henrietta will show you. You will have your own quarters until we are properly married. That will not happen for some weeks yet. Not until you have rested. Not until you know what you are getting into. Not until you and I have had a long, honest conversation about my family and about what is coming for this valley this spring. I will not push you. I will not touch you without your asking. You have my word." She turned to look at him. "Mr. Hawthorne, I am very tired." "Yes, ma'am. I would like to sleep, and in the morning I would like to begin learning whatever it is I need to learn here." He smiled. It was the first smile she had seen from him. It was small. It barely turned the corner of his mouth, but his amber eyes warmed. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Welcome to Silver Pine." Henrietta led Adelaide up the broad oak staircase. Her room was at the end of a long hall. It was simple but lovely. A wide bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk by the window. The window faced the high ridge to the east where the last light was leaving the snow on the peaks. Henrietta set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Bathwater will be hot in 20 minutes, child. Supper is at 7. The boys will not bother you. Anything you need, you ring the small bell on the desk. I sleep 2 doors down." Adelaide thanked her. Henrietta paused at the door, looking back at her. The old woman's eyes were soft now, soft and very tired. "He is a good man," Henrietta said. "All 3 of them are. They have not had it easy. You be patient with the eldest. He has more inside him than he knows how to say." She paused. "And mind your back, child. There are things in this valley that you do not yet know. There is a man down in Pine Ridge who would see this house burn to the ground if he could. That is all I will say tonight." She closed the door softly behind her. Adelaide stood alone in the lamplit room. She walked to the window. She watched the last gold leave the snow on the high ridge. She turned and crossed to her trunk to find a clean dress and a comb. She knelt and unstrapped the lid. She opened the trunk. A folded piece of paper lay on top of her clothes. She did not remember putting it there. She picked it up with cold fingers. She unfolded it. The handwriting was small and careful, written in pencil. the hand of someone who had taken time over each letter. Child, welcome to Silver Pine Valley. There are things about this family no one will tell you. Ask them about the deaths of the elder Hawthorns in December of 1866. Ask them about the brother-in-law. Ask them about the avalanche that no one can prove was an avalanche. The truth will turn your blood cold, but it is a truth you must know if you are to stand beside them through what is coming. Trust no one in Pine Ridge. Trust the housekeeper. Trust the youngest brother first. Be careful with the oldest, not because he is bad, because he is wounded. A friend. Adelaide read the note twice. She read it a third time. Her hand began to shake. She walked to the lamp. She held the paper up close to the flame so she could read the handwriting again, looking for some clue. There was nothing. No name, no mark. Only the careful pencil hand of a stranger who had somehow opened her trunk between Boston and Silver Pine Valley. She thought of the old woman on the bench in Boston. She thought of the woman on the train. The mouth lies. The eyes do not. She thought of Beckett, standing on the platform in Pine Ridge, taking off his hat, laying his coat across her shoulders. The amber eyes that did not lie. And then she thought of the men who had been standing close beside the mayor as the wagon rolled out of town. The tall one with the thin scar across his lip, pointing at her, pointing at the wagon. Adelaide folded the paper. She slid it into the bottom of her trunk beneath a quilt. She did not light the second exam. She sat down on the edge of the bed in the dim lamplight. She breathed slow. Below her, somewhere in the great lodge, she heard a piano begin to play. Softly, a Chopin nocturne. The same one her father had taught her when she was 12. The notes drifted up the stairs and through the closed door and filled the room. Adelaide bowed her head into her cold hands. She had crossed 2,000 miles to a valley she did not know. She had married herself to the future of a family she did not understand. She had stepped into the middle of a fight that had begun 12 years before her train pulled out of Boston. And somewhere out there, beyond the ring of mountains, a thin, scarred man was reporting back to a fat mare who wanted this valley dead. Friend, that was the end of Adelaide Whitmore's first day in Silver Pine. She did not know yet what was coming. She did not know that in 6 short weeks, she would be the one wading through chest-deep snow to drag a wounded mountain man up out of a ravine. She did not know that the careful pencil note in the bottom of her trunk had been written by a hand much closer to her than she could yet guess. She did not know that the piano music drifting up to her room was the first time the eldest Hawthorne brother had touched those keys in 12 years. She only knew that she was home, and that home she was beginning to understand was a far more dangerous word than she had ever realized. Adelaide woke before the dawn on her first morning at Silver Pine. The room was cold and the lamp had burned out hours ago. She lay very still beneath the heavy quilts and listened to a house she did not yet know. Somewhere below, a stove door clanged. A dog barked once and went quiet. A man's heavy boots crossed a wooden floor and paused. She heard a door open and close. She heard the deep silence of a place built into the side of a mountain. She rose. She washed her face in cold water from the porcelain basin. She dressed in a clean wool dress from her trunk. She brushed her honey blonde hair and pinned it simply at the nape of her neck. She did not put on the small cameo brooch her mother had given her at the depot. She would not wear pretty things on her first day of work. Whatever her station was to be in this great house, she meant to begin it the way her father had taught her to begin every hard thing, with her sleeves rolled up and her hands ready. When she came down the broad oak staircase at 5:30, Henrietta was already in the great room laying a fresh fire. The old woman straightened with a small grunt and looked Adelaide up and down once. "You are an early riser, child." "My father taught me. He said the day belongs to the one who claims it first." Henrietta nodded slow. Wise man. He was. The old woman gestured with her chin toward the kitchen. "Coffee is on." Beckett took his at 4 and went out to split wood. He will not come back in until 8. Holden left before light to check the beaver line along the river. Red is at the mill house with a worker who took a saw blade across the hand last night. Breakfast is at 8. You and I have 3 hours alone to begin teaching you this house. Are you up to it? Adelaide smiled for the first time in many weeks. Yes, ma'am, I am. That was how it began. The first 6 weeks at Silver Pine. Henrietta did not coddle her. The old housekeeper put Adelaide to work the way a teacher puts a bright pupil to work. The kitchen first, then the larder, where Adelaide learned the difference between salt pork and side bacon, between hard winter wheat and soft. She learned how the iron stove drew how to bank the fire so it would still hold heat at 5 in the morning. She learned to knead a loaf of sourdough bread on a floured board until it sang back at her under the heel of her hand. She learned to wash 30 work shirts in one tub. With lye soap, she helped Henrietta render herself from beef tallow and wood ash. Her hands cracked the first week. She rubbed them with a salve Rhett brought her in a small clay pot. By the end of the second week, the cracks had healed and her hands were stronger. She learned the men of the lodge by watching them because none of them were the kind to explain themselves. Beckett rose at 4. He went out into the dark with a lantern and split wood for the lodge stoves until his shirt steamed in the cold air. He came in at 8, ate a heavy breakfast, drank 2 cups of black coffee, and rode out to the timber camps. He rarely returned before dusk. When he came in, he was tired in a way that did not show on his face but showed in the slow, careful way he hung his coat. He read for an hour after supper books on law and forestry and the campaigns of General Sherman. He went to bed at 10. He spoke to Adelaide kindly and briefly. He did not touch her. He kept his word. Holden was the wild one. He was younger than Beckett by 2 years and a hand shorter, but he carried himself with the watchful grace of a hunter. He could shoot a snowshoe hare at 120 yards with a single round from his Winchester. He could read a track in the snow the way a learned man read a page. He laughed easier than his elder brother, but his laughter never quite reached his eyes. He had a long, pale scar that ran from the point of his left shoulder down across his chest. He did not speak of how he had got it. Adelaide overheard one of the timber hands tell another that Holden had killed a grizzly bear with a knife in the fall of 1873. The tale sounded like the kind of thing men told over drinks. Then she saw the bearskin laid before the great fireplace, the broad pelt almost as long as Holden was tall, and she stopped doubting. Rhett was the gentle one. He was 29 years old. He had studied medicine for 2 years at Philadelphia before grief and duty had brought him home. He kept a small infirmary at the mill house and rode out twice a week to tend the workers' families along the river. He treated coughs and broken bones in the deep aching tooth of an old logger, boss, named Pap. He did not turn anyone away. He had soft amber eyes and a quiet way of speaking that made even hard men listen. The first time Adelaide watched him stitch a cut hand without flinching, watched him soothe the worker with a low, steady voice while his fingers worked the needle through the torn skin, she understood something about Red Hawthorne. He had not become a doctor, but he had become a healer. There is not always the same thing. And then there was Toby, 8 years old, a scrawny boy with dark hair always falling into his eyes and a permanent scrape on at least one knee. Red had found him 2 winters earlier, living half wild in the ruins of a homestead 12 miles up the valley, his parents dead of fever and forgotten by the territory. Red had brought him home in the back of the wagon. The boy had taken to Beckett like a stray dog takes to a steady hand. He slept in a small room off the kitchen. He swept the porches. He carried wood. He called Henrietta Nana. He had not yet decided what to call Adelaide, and so he simply did not call her anything, but he watched her with careful eyes the way a child watches a stranger to see whether they will turn out to be safe. By the end of her second week in Silver Pine, Adelaide, Whitmore had begun very quietly to belong. In the third week, the snow came in hard, not the storm yet, that would come later. Just a steady, soft 3-day fall that whitened the valley and silenced the world. Adelaide spent that snowed-in week with Henrietta and the men, and it was during that week that the small private moments began. Holden came in one evening with 2 beaver from the riverline. He laid them out on the long workbench in the side shed. Adelaide came out wrapped in her shawl and stood at his elbow. "Mr. Holden, could you teach me to skin one of these?" He looked at her sideways. "Ma'am, with respect, that is dirty work." "All work is dirty work somewhere," she said. "I would rather know than not know." He considered her a long moment. Then he handed her his second, sharpest knife. "Hold it like a pen," he said, "not like a sword. The cut starts at the back legs. You follow the seam where the fur changes color. You do not push. You let the blade do the work. If you push, you tear the hide and the pelt is worth half." Her hand shook the first time. He did not laugh at her. He stood close at her shoulder and corrected her angle with a single finger when she went wrong. The knife slipped once. He caught her wrist before she cut herself and steadied her hand. His grip was warm and very strong. "Easy," he said. "You ain't in a hurry." She finished the first beaver in 20 minutes. She finished the second one in 8. When she lifted the second pelt clean from the carcass and laid it on the curing board, Holden looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. "Boston," he said. "Yes." "I will be damned." She laughed. It was the first real laugh she had made since her father died. Beckett was standing in the open doorway behind them. Neither of them had heard him come up. He had a load of split wood in his arms. His amber eyes moved from his brother to her. He did not smile exactly, but the line along his jaw eased the way it had eased that first night by the campfire when she had slipped sage into the beans. He said nothing. He carried the wood inside. That same evening, Adelaide discovered the locked door. It was on the 3rd floor at the end of the east hallway, a heavy oak door with iron hinges. She had walked past it twice in her first week without thinking about it. But this evening, as she carried fresh linens up to a guest bedroom, she heard it. Music, faint, coming from inside the locked room. A piano, a Chopin nocturne, the same one her father had taught her when she was 12. She stopped in the hallway. She stood very still and listened. The playing was uneven, a man's hands working through a piece they had not touched in many years. A wrong note, a pause, then the right note found again. She knew the piece. She knew it intimately. She had played it on the upright in the parlor of the Boston house every Sunday afternoon of her girlhood, with her father in his chair by the window and a cup of weak tea on the small table beside him. Adelaide raised her hand to the door. She lowered it. She raised it again. She knocked. Soft. Twice. The music stopped. After a long moment, the door opened. Beckett Hawthorne stood there with the lamplight behind him. He had taken off his work coat, and he stood in his shirt sleeves with the cuffs rolled to his forearms. His amber eyes were tired. He looked at her without surprise. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has just walked into a room he had been about to invite them into anyway. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Hawthorne, I am sorry, I heard the music." "I am out of practice." His voice was very quiet. "I have not played that piece in 12 years. He stepped back from the door. He did not say, "Come in," but he did not close her out, so she stepped through. The room was beautiful. A small private library lined 3 of the 4 walls with books. A fine upright piano stood against the 4th. Heavy oil paintings of mountain landscapes hung between the bookshelves. A worn velvet armchair faced a small stone fireplace where no fire had been laid for many years. A thin layer of dust lay over everything except the piano keys. On the mantel stood a single photograph in a brass frame. A dark-haired woman of perhaps 40 smiled at the camera. She had her arms around 3 boys. The eldest stood tall and serious at her right, perhaps 18, almost a man. The middle one grinned with all his teeth and held a wooden gun. The youngest, no more than 13, leaned into his mother's side with his head against her shoulder. Adelaide did not need to ask. Beckett came to stand beside her. He looked at the photograph the way a man looks at something that still hurts. "My mother, Catherine Hawthorne. That picture was taken in Denver in the summer of 1866, 5 months before she died. You were so young." I was 21. I had been home from the war just over a year. Holden was 19. Rhett was 17. We lost them both in the same week. Cold week of December. They went down to Denver on company business and they never came back. Cornelius Ashford, who was the sheriff of Pine Ridge, then rode up with a sworn statement in the bodies. He said an avalanche had taken them on the Eagle Cut Road. He said it was a bad winter and these things happened. And you did not believe him. No, ma'am. Why? He did not answer for a long moment. He walked over to the piano and ran his fingers along the keys without depressing them. He spoke without looking at her. Because I was the one who washed my father's body for burial. And there were bruises along his throat that no avalanche puts there. And there was a clean cut on the back of his head that did not match a blow from a stone. I was a soldier, Miss Whitmore. I had seen what men do to men. My father had been struck from behind, then strangled. After he was dead, the body was placed where the snow could cover it. My mother died next to him, same kind of bruising on her neck. I held my tongue for 12 years because I had no proof, only what I knew. And what I knew did not stand up in any court of law. Adelaide felt the cold travel down her spine the way it had on the platform at Pine Ridge. The folded note in the bottom of her trunk burned against her thoughts. Ask them about the deaths of the elder Hawthorns. Ask them about the brother-in-law. Mr. Hawthorne, Beckett, please. We are past Mr. Beckett, the man in Pine Ridge, Mayor Ashford. What was he to your mother? Beckett looked up from the piano keys. The amber eyes were very steady. He was her younger brother, ma'am. My mother's brother. My uncle by blood. He killed his own sister. Yes, ma'am. I believe with all that is left of my soul that he killed his own sister and his own brother-in-law. And I believe he has spent the 12 years since making sure no one ever proves it. And I believe he means to take this valley before the spring melt. That is who I have led you to. That is what is coming for this house. I owed you that truth before I asked you to marry me. Adelaide did not speak for a long time. She looked at the photograph on the mantel, at the dark-haired woman with her arms around her 3 boys, at the small, slight tilt of the youngest son's head against his mother's shoulder. How many people have you told? Holden and Rhett, Henrietta, no one else until tonight. She looked at him, and now me, and now you. She crossed the room and took his hand. He was a much taller man than she was. His hand swallowed hers up, but she felt his fingers close around hers as if she were the one steadying him. Beckett Hawthorne, I am going to tell you something my father told me. He said the deepest grief a person carries is the grief that no one believes. I believe you. I believe every word. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in him had moved. Adelaide, he said. The first time he had spoken her given name, it came out of him slow like a word he had been saving. You are home now, and this house has more in it than 4 walls. It has ghosts, it has hope, and now it has you. That was the second time he had said it. You are home now. She did not know yet that he would say it many more times before the story was over. She did not know yet that those words were going to become the thing she held to in the worst hour she had ever lived through. She only knew standing in that quiet locked room with her hand in his and Catherine Hawthorne smiling down at them from the brass frame that she had stopped being a stranger in this valley. The wedding came 2 weeks later. It was a simple affair, a small chapel at the edge of the timber camp built by the workers themselves the summer before. Henrietta sewed Adelaide's dress out of cream-colored silk that had once been Catherine Hawthorne's wedding gown. Catherine had been a tall woman. Adelaide was small. Henrietta took the gown apart at the seams and made a new one that fit Adelaide as if it had been cut for her from the start. 200 people came, every soul on the Hawthorne payroll. Some came in their Sunday best. Some came in their cleanest work clothes. The schoolhouse children sang a hymn they had been practicing for 3 days. A blind fiddler from one of the cottages played the wedding march. Beckett stood at the altar in a clean black coat and a white shirt buttoned to the throat. His chestnut hair was combed back. His amber eyes followed Adelaide all the way up the aisle. He did not smile, but his shoulders, which had been carrying something heavy for so long that no one remembered what he looked like without it, had eased. Adelaide carried no flowers. There were none in winter. She carried her father's old leather Bible. The vows were spoken plain. The rings were exchanged. They kissed once gently the way people kiss who mean to be kissing each other for a long time. There was no sermon. The chaplain said only what he needed to say. Then the brothers came forward. This was the part of the day that Adelaide had not been told about in advance. Holden and Rhett came up to stand on either side of the altar. Henrietta brought forward an old steel sword, plain of hilt, the handle worn smooth by use. The sword had belonged to Beckett's grandfather, Adelaide would learn later. It had crossed the country in 1844 when the Hawthorns had first come west. Holden took the sword. He laid it across his open palms. He went down on one knee before Adelaide. Rhett knelt beside him. They each lay one hand on the blade. Holden spoke. His voice was steady and low. Before God and our fathers, before this valley and these people, we swear that Adelaide Hawthorne is sister to us by blood and by bond, that our blood will defend her blood, that our lives will stand in front of her life as long as breath is in us. So help us, God. Rhett spoke the same words. They rose. They each kissed her forehead the way brothers kiss a sister. Then they stepped back to their places. Adelaide felt tears come at last. She had not wept on the platform at Pine Ridge Depot. She had not wept the night she cut her hair in Boston. She had not wept the evening Beckett told her about his mother and father. But she wept now, quietly. Because for the first time in her 23 years on this earth, she had a family bigger than 4 people, and that family had just sworn itself to her. The night that followed was theirs. Beckett walked her up the long staircase with her hand in his. He paused at the door of her room and asked her plainly whether she was sure. She said she was. He opened the door. He let her go in first. The door closed soft behind them. Outside the tall windows, the snow fell slow over the dark valley. Inside, 2 people who had each in their own way been alone for a long time were finally not alone anymore. When morning came, the snow was falling outside the tall windows, and the light was gray and gentle, and something in Adelaide that had always been alone was no longer alone. She lay against his shoulder and listened to his slow, steady breathing. She thought of the old woman on the bench. She thought of how the woman had said the men in the high country chose forever. She understood now what that meant. But friend, that morning was the last quiet morning Adelaide Hawthorne would have for a long while. Because while she slept, 2 telegrams had been delivered to the lodge in the early hours, one from Pine Ridge, one from Denver. The first telegram was signed by Mayor Cornelius Ashford. It informed Beckett that a federal investigation had been opened concerning quote-unquote irregular financial practices at the Hawthorne Timber Company. Hearings would begin in February. The second telegram was from the Denver Mercantile Bank. It informed Beckett that the property tax assessment on Silver Pine Valley had been recalculated under a new schedule that would make the spring payment double what he had paid the previous year. Payment was due on the 15th of January. That was 3 weeks away. Beckett read the telegrams at the kitchen table while Adelaide slept upstairs. He set them down very gently on the worn pine boards. He drank his coffee black. He looked out the window at the falling snow. He understood the way a man understands a fist coming for his face that the war had begun. The blizzard hit on the 5th of January. It came in faster than any storm Henrietta could remember in 30 years on the mountain. The sky was clear at noon. By 3 in the afternoon, the wind had risen out of the north, and the temperature had dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. By dusk, the snow was falling so thick a man could not see his own hand at the end of his arm. By midnight, the drifts at the lodge porch were chest deep. The road to Pine Ridge was gone. The telegraph line strung along the road on cedar poles had snapped under the ice in 3 places. Silver Pine Valley was cut off from the world. Adelaide stood at the kitchen window the next morning watching the snow fall. The fire roared in the great hearth behind her. Henrietta was kneading bread at the long table. Toby was sitting on the floor by the fire with a wooden horse Holden had carved him. The lodge was warm and full of the smell of bacon and coffee and pine smoke. That was when Toby came in from the barn. The boy's cheeks were red and his breast steamed in the cold doorway. And he had been out checking on the horses. He was crying, not from fear, from cold and from urgency. Mr. Beckett was at the long table cleaning his rifle. He looked up at once. What is it, son? Smoke, up on the old mountain, past the ridge. I seen it from the loft of the barn just now. Two thin lines of smoke, like cook fires. There is somebody up there, Mr. Beckett. Somebody up where there ain't supposed to be nobody. Beckett set the rifle down very slow. The old mountain was a high shoulder of stone north of the valley. It was the place where the grizzly bears denned. Trappers did not work it. Hunters did not climb it. There was no homestead and no shelter and no reason on earth for any human soul to be on that mountain in the middle of a January blizzard. Beckett looked at Holden. Holden was already standing. He was already reaching for his coat. It is a trap, brother. I know it is a trap. Then do not go. If I do not go and there is a man up there freezing to death, I will know I left him. I cannot live with that. Beckett buttoned his heavy coat. He pulled the bear fur over it. He took down his Winchester from the rack and slid 5 rounds into the magazine. If it is a trap, the man who set it has come a long way for me. Better to meet him out there than to wait for him to come down here. Holden cursed once low, then he too began to dress. Adelaide stepped forward. I will come. Beckett stopped. He turned to her. His amber eyes were very gentle. No, Adelaide. I know herbs, if anyone is hurt up there. No. His voice was firm but not unkind. You stay with Red and Henrietta and Toby. The roads are gone. The valley is cut off. I need a strong hand here while we are out. That hand is yours. Promise me. She looked into his eyes for a long moment. She did not want to promise. She wanted to argue, but she saw something in his face that stopped her. He was not refusing her because she was a woman. He was asking her to hold the lodge for him, the way a captain trusts the second in command to hold the ground while he goes forward. I promise. He kissed her forehead once, quick, hard. Then he and Holden walked out into the white. The door closed behind them. The wind howled. 2 hours later, the men came. Adelaide was in the kitchen with Henrietta when she heard the horses. 5 of them, coming up the long drive at a trot through the snow. The riders did not call out. They did not knock at the gate. They came straight up to the porch and dismounted. Rhett was already at the front door with his pistol drawn. The man who climbed down off the lead horse was a tall man with a thin scar across his upper lip. The same man Adelaide had seen standing close beside Mayor Ashford the day she rode out of Pine Ridge. He did not bother knocking. He pushed the door open and walked into the great room as if he owned it. 4 armed men came in behind him. They wore long oilcloth coats. They wore federal marshal-style badges pinned to those coats. But the badges were the wrong shape, and the men did not carry themselves like federal officers. They carried themselves like men who had been hired to do something and paid in advance. My name is Buford Crane, the lead man said. I am the sheriff of Pine Ridge. By order of the Denver Mercantile Bank and by warrant of Judge Hartwood of the Denver District Court, I am taking custody of this property pending the resolution of a tax dispute. The household is to remain confined to the great room and the kitchen until further notice. Anyone leaving these rooms will be considered in violation of federal warrant. He held up a folded paper. Rhett stepped right forward. His pistol was steady at his side. Crane, show me that paper. Crane smiled with his thin scar of a mouth. He handed the paper to Rhett. Rhett read it. The seal at the bottom did appear to be a Denver District Court seal. The signature appeared to be Judge Hartwood's. The wording was correct. It might even have been real. It did not matter. The roads to Denver were buried in 15 feet of snow. There was no way to telegraph a contest. There was no way to ride to a higher court. By the time the snow melted, this valley would have been held at gunpoint for 6 weeks, and any number of accidents could be arranged in 6 weeks. Adelaide understood it all in a single breath. She did not let her face change. She stepped forward beside Rhett. She made her voice small and a little unsteady the way a frightened woman would. "Sheriff, I am Mrs. Hawthorne. My husband has gone up on the mountain. There is a child here and an old woman. Will you allow me to fix you and your men some coffee and a hot supper? We have plenty. There is no need for hard words." Buford Crane's eyes moved over her slow. He saw what he expected to see: a small, frightened bride, a pretty little Boston thing in a wool dress. He smiled. "Ma'am, that is most hospitable of you. Most hospitable. The boys and I have been riding hard since first light. A hot supper would be much appreciated." "Then please, sit by the fire. I will see to it." She moved toward the kitchen. She caught Rhett's eye as she passed him. She held his gaze for one full second. Rhett, the youngest, the healer, the student of medicine. He understood. She could see it in his face. In the kitchen, Adelaide moved fast. Henrietta was already there with Toby. Adelaide caught Henrietta by the elbow and spoke very low. "I need you to take Toby to your room and stay there. Do not come out. Whatever you hear, do not come out. Child, trust me, please." Henrietta saw something in Adelaide's eyes and asked no more. She took the boy by the hand and went up the back stairs. Rhett came in through the kitchen door. He shut it behind him. He spoke in a whisper. "Adelaide, what are you thinking?" "Hops, valerian, in the milk, heavy doses. They will not taste it in coffee that strong." His face changed. "How heavy?" "Heavy enough that they sleep within the hour. Not heavy enough to kill them. We do not need them dead. We need them asleep. You understand if we get this wrong." "I understand. Get me the herbs." He moved to the cabinet. He brought down 2 small jars. He weighed out the dried hops and the dried valerian on a small kitchen scale. He worked fast and clean. "Adelaide, how did you know it was a trap?" "Because Beckett was called away by a sighting that was almost too convenient. Because Sheriff Crane arrived less than 2 hours later with a warrant prepared in advance. Because the storm cut us off from any possibility of appeal. My father loved military history, Red. I read every book on his shelf. This is a flanking maneuver. They drew Beckett away so they could take this house. Once they have the house, the men up on the mountain will kill him on his way down." Rhett went very still. "Then we have no time." "No, we do not. Brew the coffee strong. I will warm the milk." She poured the milk into the heavy iron pot. She added Rhett's measured doses of crushed hops and valerian and stirred the herbs in until the milk took on the faintest greenish cast at the bottom of the pot. She poured the milk through fine sheets of cloth into a clean pitcher. The pitcher came out white and innocent. She set the pitcher on the tray beside the coffee pot and the cups and a small bowl of sugar. She carried the tray into the great room herself. She set it on the long table by the fire. She poured the coffee, black and steaming, into 5 tin mugs. She set the milk pitcher beside them with the sugar bowl. She smiled at Sheriff Crane. "Sugar and milk are on the tray, gentlemen. Help yourselves." Crane took his coffee, black with 2 heaping spoons of sugar. The other 4 men poured generous amounts of the milk into theirs. One of them, a heavy bearded man, drank his cup off in 3 swallows and held it out for more. Adelaide poured for him with a steady hand. "Could we trouble you for some supper, ma'am?" "Of course, I will have it ready within the hour." She returned to the kitchen. She and Rhett stood together at the kitchen table. They did not speak. They listened. It took 35 minutes. At first, Crane and his men talked among themselves in the great room. Coarse jokes, a laugh, a second round of milk and coffee. Then the laughter slowed. One of the men yawned long and loud. Another said his eyes were heavy and the storm had taken it out of him. Crane made a sharp comment and stood up to walk it off. He sat down again. He did not stand up a second time. By 40 minutes after the first cup, all five of Mayor Ashford's hired men were slumped in the great chairs by the fire, breathing the slow, heavy breath of deep drug sleep. Adelaide and Rhett moved fast. They tied each man with strong rope at the wrists and ankles. They dragged the men one at a time into the side cellar and laid them on the cold stone floor. They locked the cellar door from the outside with the heavy iron bar Beckett used for storing the spring meat. Rhett collected every weapon: 5 revolvers, 2 long knives, a cut-down shotgun strapped to the inside of Crane's coat. They stacked the weapons on the kitchen table. Adelaide. Rhett's voice was hoarse. He was 29 years old and he had just helped his sister-in-law drug 5 federal-style imposters. We need to go after Beckett now. I know. She looked toward the hall closet where Beckett's spare hunting clothes hung. She went to it. She pulled out a heavy canvas hunting coat, a thick wool sweater, trousers belted to her waist with a length of rope because they were 3 sizes too big, snowshoes, Beckett's spare wide-brim hat which fell down over her eyes. She caught it with one hand and tied it under her chin with a strip of leather. She looked ridiculous. She did not care. Rhett dressed quickly in his own gear. Toby will mind the cellar door. Henrietta has the shotgun. They will be safe. Then we go. They stepped out into the white roar of the blizzard. The storm was worse now than it had been all day. The wind hit Adelaide like a fist. The snow was past her knees within 5 steps. Rhett went ahead to break a path through the deepest drifts. They followed the trail Beckett and Holden had broken hours earlier, faint now, and almost filled in. The cold reached through her coat in minutes. She thought of nothing except the next step, and the next step, and the next amendment. An hour into the climb, they found Holden. He was huddled under a fallen pine in a small hollow where the wind broke around the trunk. His left shoulder was a black, wet bloom. He was conscious. Barely. He saw Rhett and tried to speak. Bushwhacked, he managed. 3 of them came down off the ridge. Beckett took the round. He fell. They pushed him over. The drop above the creek. I crawled here. I was going to come down for help when I could move. Rhett knelt beside him. How long ago? An hour, maybe 90 minutes. The men who shot you. Gone. They thought they had us both. They rode east toward the lower trail. Rhett began to work on the shoulder. Adelaide stood up. How far is the drop? 1/4 mile up, the big bend in the creek bed. Stay here with him. Adelaide, I am the smaller one, the lighter one. I can go down on the rope, and you cannot. Stay with your brother. Tie a rope to a tree at the top and lower me down. I will tie him on. You will pull us both up. Rhett looked at her for one long second. Then he nodded. She climbed alone into the storm. She found the drop. She found the rope tied around a sturdy pine where Beckett and Holden had left a length coil for emergencies. She tied the loose end around her own waist with a careful bowline her father had taught her on a Boston dock when she was 9. She let herself over the edge. She lowered herself down, hand over hand, into the white nothing. She found him at the bottom. Beckett Hawthorne was face down in the snow beside the frozen creek. His right leg was bent the wrong way at the knee. There was a long graze along his temple where a bullet had cut him, leaking blood that had frozen black against his cheek. His pulse, when she pressed her cold fingers to his throat, was there. It was thready, but it was there. She worked fast. She splinted the broken leg with 2 stout pine branches and the wide leather belt from her own coat. She packed handfuls of crushed yarrow leaves she had brought from Rhett's stores into the head wound and bound it tight with a strip of clean linen. She tilted his head back and trickled a small swallow of whiskey from the flask in his coat pocket between his lips. He coughed, his eyes open. Adelaide, I am here. You should not be here. I am here, Beckett. Hold on to me. She tied the rope around his chest. She tugged twice. The rope began to rise, slowly, steadily. She climbed beside him with her hand on his shoulder. They reached the top together. Rhett pulled them both over the edge. It took 2 more hours to get them down off the mountain. Holden could walk with help. Rhett supported him. Adelaide and Rhett dragged Beckett on a makeshift sled cut from a wide piece of bark and lashed with rope. They reached the lodge at 3 in the morning. The fire was still burning. Henrietta met them at the door with hot broth and dry blankets. Beckett did not regain full consciousness for 3 days. When he opened his amber eyes at last and saw Adelaide sitting beside the bed, with her hair loose and her eyes hollow from sleeplessness, he did not speak for a long time. He just looked at her. Then he reached out one weak hand and laid it over hers. "You came down for me. I came down for you. You should not have. You once told me a man keeps his word. I am your wife, Beckett. I made a vow. I keep mine too." He closed his eyes. Tears came from beneath the lashes. He did not try to hide them. "Adelaide Hawthorne, I have been wrong about a great many things in my life. I was wrong from the first day to think you were the one who needed saving." She bent and laid her forehead against his. They breathed together a long while. That afternoon, while Beckett slept, Henrietta came up to the bedroom carrying a small wooden box. She set it on the table beside the bed. Her eyes were wet and her hands were shaking just a little. "Child," she said quiet, "I have been keeping this for 12 years. Catherine asked me to. She said when one of the boys married a woman who would stand for them, I was to give it to her. You stood. So this is yours." Adelaide opened the box. Inside was a leather-bound journal in a woman's careful hand. Folded among its pages were yellowed bank ledgers and a stack of brittle letters, the topmost dated December 2nd of 1866. The handwriting on the journal was the same handwriting that had written the receipts hanging in the framed family records in the hall downstairs. It was Catherine Hawthorne's diary. Adelaide began to read. By the time she reached the third page, her hands were shaking. By the fifth, the cold had come back into her spine, but it was a different cold now. It was the cold of a woman who has just understood all at once exactly how this fight was going to end and exactly who was going to end it. She closed the journal slow. She looked at the man sleeping in the bed beside her. "Beckett," she said softly, even though he could not hear her. "You told me you had no proof. You were wrong, my love. We have it. We have all of it." Outside the window, the snow had finally begun to slow. Above the high peaks, a thin line of gold was opening along the eastern horizon. The storm was breaking. And friend, when the storm broke at Silver Pine Valley in January of 1879, it was not just the weather that was about to clear. 12 years of silence was about to come down off that mountain. And Mayor Cornelius Ashford, sitting warm in his polished boots in the town hall at Pine Ridge, did not yet know that the small Boston bride he had laughed at in the square 3 months before was on her way back, with a journal in her hand, and a federal marshal at her side, and a town full of witnesses waiting to see what kind of justice the high country had been keeping in reserve. The snow took 3 weeks to settle. Beckett healed slow. The break in his leg had been clean, and Rhett had set it well that first long night. But a man does not walk again on a shattered knee in 7 days. He spent the first week flat on his back, the second week sitting up by the fire, and the third week limping along the great hall on a hickory cane Holden had carved for him out of a length of old porch beam. The cane had a smooth knob at the top, polished by the heel of Holden's hand over many evenings beside the fire. He gave it to his elder brother without ceremony, the way men in this family gave each other things. Adelaide did not leave Beckett's side those first 10 days. She slept in a chair beside the bed. She fed him broth, one careful spoon at a time. She read aloud to him from her father's leather Bible and from a book of Tennyson she had carried west in her trunk. She read until her voice went hoarse. When he was strong enough to talk, they talked low together for hours about Catherine's journal, about the bank ledgers, about the brittle letters with their faded ink and their dates and their sums. The journal was the thing that broke Beckett wide open. The reading of it. He read it twice all the way through, with Adelaide sitting on the edge of the bed beside him, her hand resting on his arm. Catherine Hawthorne had written in a clear school teacher's hand, much like Adelaide's own, with neat dated entries that began in the spring of 1864 and ended on the 2nd of December 1866, 6 days before her death. The early entries were a mother's small daily things, the garden at the lodge, a letter from Beckett at the Union Army camp, a worry about Rhett's cough, a pride in Holden's first deer. Then the entries began to change. By the fall of 1865, after Beckett had come home from the war, Catherine had begun to write about her younger brother, about Cornelius, about small numbers that did not add up, about a freight invoice that had been altered, about a pay envelope that had gone missing. By the spring of 1866, the entries had grown sharp and grim. Catherine had begun to keep a separate ledger of her own, a careful private record of every transaction she could prove. She had compared it line by line with the company's official books, which Cornelius's bookkeeper had been keeping for 7 years. The two sets of numbers did not match. The difference totaled across 3 years of hidden withdrawals was just over $50,000. The final entry was dated December 2nd of 1866. Catherine had written it in a hand that had begun to tremble at the edges. I have spoken to Theodore tonight. He has read every page. He believes me. Cornelius has been stealing from this company for 3 years. We have proof. We will go to Denver next week to meet with Edwin Pierce and have the brother written out of every account. Theodore is grieved beyond what I can describe. I am his wife, but Cornelius is my own flesh, and I must be the one to do this thing. If anything befalls us between now and our return, let those who come after us know that Cornelius Ashford is capable of any deed in defense of his lies. He has proved as much in the small things. Let him not be underestimated in the large. I trust Henrietta with this book. I trust my sons more than my own breath. May God protect them when I am no longer here to do it myself. 6 days later, Catherine and Theodore Hawthorne were dead on the Eagle Cut Road, and Sheriff Cornelius Ashford was telling the territory it had been an avalanche. When Beckett finished the journal the second time, he closed it slow and set it on the bedside table. He did not weep. He had wept the first time. He looked at Adelaide instead with the amber eyes that did not lie, and he said only one thing: now we can move. The marshal arrived in the second week. Beckett had sent Holden with a single sealed letter the moment the high pass opened. Holden had ridden 2 days hard to a federal way station at Cheyenne and put the letter into the hands of a station chief who knew the Hawthorne name. 3 days after that, on a clear, cold morning, a tall, lean man in a long oilcloth coat rode up the drive of the lodge on a buckskin gelding. He was perhaps 50 years old. His hair had gone iron gray at the temples. His eyes were a pale blue that had seen a great deal and forgotten very little. A federal marshal's star rode plain on his chest. Beckett came out onto the porch on his cane. The two men looked at each other a long moment without speaking. Then Beckett stepped forward and gripped the marshal's hand. "Gus." "Beckett, you came. You knew I would." His name was Augustus Holloway. Folks called him Gus. He had served in the same Union regiment as Beckett during the last spring of the war. They had eaten the same hard biscuit in the same cold trenches at Petersburg. They had stood together in the smoke at Sailor's Creek on the 6th of April, 1865. Gus had carried Beckett out of that battle on his back when a piece of canister shot had cut Beckett's hip. The two of them had not seen each other since the late autumn of 1865. They had written letters across the years at Christmas and on a few other plain occasions, the way men keep faith with each other when there is nothing else to be said. When a man like Beckett Hawthorne sends a sealed letter to a man like Gus Holloway, that man does not delay. He saddles his horse and he rides. Adelaide met him at the door with coffee. Gus Holloway took off his hat and held it in both hands when she gave him the cup, and he called her ma'am with a respect that did not feel false. She liked him at once. She watched him sit at the long oak table in the great room while Beckett laid out the journal, the bank ledgers, the brittle letters, and the written sworn statement they had taken from Sheriff Buford Crane after 3 weeks of confinement in the lodge cellar, when the man finally chose to talk in exchange for the chance to live. Gus read for 2 hours without speaking. He did not interrupt. He turned the pages slow. He compared the dates on Catherine's private ledger, against the dates on the bank documents. He read Crane's confession 3 times. He read Catherine's last entry twice. When at last he laid the papers down, his face had gone very still. Beckett, yes, you have known about the murder for 12 years. I have suspected. I have not had proof. You have proof now, yes. You understand what this is. This is not a small case. Cornelius Ashford has been lobbying the territorial legislature for 6 months for the open Senate seat. He has the backing of the Denver Mercantile Bank and a string of cattle interests across 2 counties. If we move, we are not just bringing down a corrupt mayor. We are bringing down a candidate for federal office. There will be men in Washington who feel that win. Good, Beckett said. Let them feel it. Gus looked at him a long moment. Then a small, hard smile moved across the corner of his mouth. You always did have a long memory, Hawthorne, and a longer patience. Then let us go put it to use. They rode for Pine Ridge on the first Saturday in February. The day was cold and clear. The sky was the kind of high winter blue that hurt the eye. The high peaks shone white above the valley. Beckett rode in front on his black gelding, his cane lashed to the saddle, his right leg still stiff in the stirrup. Adelaide rode at his side on a steady gray mare Holden had picked for her. She wore a clean dark wool dress and the same wool gloves her mother had knit her in Boston. The Journal of Catherine Hawthorne rode in a leather satchel against her hip, wrapped in oilcloth against the cold. Holden rode point with his Winchester across his thighs. Rhett rode flank with the hospital bag and a second pistol in his coat. Henrietta sat in the wagon behind them, bundled in a buffalo robe, her hands steady on the reins. 12 mounted men of the Hawthorne timber crew rode in a loose square around the wagon. They wore long oilcloth coats. They carried rifles across their saddles. They had volunteered for this ride to a man, and Beckett had not had to ask any of them twice. Marshal Augustus Holloway rode at Beckett's other side. The Federal star on his chest caught the cold sun. They came down out of the high country in the late morning. They did not hurry. They did not need to. By the time the small column of horses appeared at the top of Main Street in Pine Ridge, the word had already run ahead of them, the way news does in towns where there is little else to talk about. Doors opened. Faces came to windows. A boy of about 10 ran out of the dry goods store and stared at them with his mouth open and then ran back inside to tell his father. The town square was full when they reached it. Saturday was market day in Pine Ridge. It was also the day Mayor Cornelius Ashford held what he called his weekly address from the wooden platform at the head of the square. The same wooden platform on which Adelaide Whitmore had stood 3 months earlier in her thin coat with her trunk at her feet and her chin raised against the laughter of strangers. Today the mayor stood there again. He was in mid-sentence as the column of horses appeared at the head of the square. He was telling the assembled crowd about the regrettable but necessary actions the bank would soon be taking with regard to the delinquent tax obligations of certain absent landowners in the high country. He was a fluent speaker. His round face shone in the cold. His polished boots gleamed. Then the crowd at the back of the square went still and turned, and the mayor looked up. Adelaide watched the color leave his face. It went from the high pink of a man enjoying his own voice to the flat pale of a man who has just seen his own gravestone. He recovered fast. He had practiced his recovery for a long time. The smile came back. He raised his hand in greeting as if welcoming guests to a wedding. Mr. Hawthorne, we were not expecting you in town today. And the lovely Mrs. Hawthorne. Welcome. Welcome to all. Beckett did not answer. He swung down off his horse, one careful leg at a time. Holden dismounted close behind him with the rifle low at his thigh. Marshal Holloway dismounted on the other side. The 12 timbermen stayed mounted in a loose ring around the square. Adelaide swung down last. She lifted the leather satchel from her saddle and held it close against her side. She walked beside Beckett to the foot of the platform. The crowd in the square parted for them without a sound. 100 pairs of eyes followed her up the 4 steps to the platform. She came to stand at the front. She set the satchel down at her feet. She looked out across the upturned faces of the town that had laughed at her the day she arrived. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The square had gone so quiet she could hear a horse stamp at the back of the crowd. People of Pine Ridge, her voice carried clear in the cold air. 3 months ago, I stood on this platform in a thin coat with all that I owned in a single trunk. I had crossed 2,000 miles to come here. I was a stranger to you. And you laughed. You bid on me as if I were stock at market. The man who runs your town encouraged you. He stood here on this very board and offered me to the highest bidder. That day, I had nothing in my hand to defend myself with. So I held my tongue. I did not weep. I did not beg. I waited. She bent slow and lifted the leather satchel from the platform floor. She unwrapped the oilcloth. She held up the leather-bound journal so the crowd could see it. Today I have something in my hand. This book belonged to Catherine Hawthorne, the lady of Silver Pine Valley, the mother of these three men standing before you. Catherine was the elder sister of your mayor, Cornelius Ashford. She died on the 8th of December in the year 1866 in what has been called for 12 years an unfortunate avalanche on the Eagle Cut Road. I am going to read to you in her own words the last entry she ever wrote in her own private journal. It is dated the 2nd of December, 6 days before she was killed. Adelaide opened the journal to the place she had marked. She read aloud in a slow, clear voice that did not waver once. I have spoken to Theodore tonight. He has read every page. He believes me. Cornelius has been stealing from this company for 3 years. We have proof. We will go to Denver next week to meet with Edwin Pierce and have my brother written out of every account. If anything befalls us between now and our return, let those who come after us know one thing. Cornelius Ashford is capable of any deed in defense of his lies. Do not underestimate him. A long silence followed, the kind of silence that has weight in it. Then a single woman's voice cried out from the middle of the crowd. It was a small, frail cry. It belonged to an older woman in a dark shawl. Lord have mercy. Cornelius Ashford had not moved. He had stood through the reading like a man frozen in his polished boots. Now he came alive all at once. His voice rose loud and shrill across the square. That book is a forgery. That woman is a fraud. She has no proof. I will not stand for Marshal Augustus Holloway stepped up the platform stairs. Mr. Ashford. Gus Holloway did not raise his voice. He spoke the way a man speaks to a horse he is about to put down. Calm. Final. My name is Augustus Holloway. I am a federal marshal commissioned out of Denver. I have spent the last week in Cheyenne examining bank records, freight invoices, and certified samples of your sister Catherine Hawthorne's handwriting taken from the Pine Ridge Town Records Office, where her name appears on 6 legal documents from before her death. The journal in this lady's hand is genuine. I have personally compared it line by line. The handwriting matches. The dates match. The figures match the bank records I obtained under federal warrant from the Denver Mercantile Bank vaults 2 days ago. He turned slow to face the crowd. In addition, I have in my possession a written and signed sworn confession from Sheriff Buford Crane of this town, taken after the events at Silver Pine Lodge on the night of the 5th of January last. Sheriff Crane has stated under oath and in fear of a prison hanging that he was paid $500 in gold by Mayor Cornelius Ashford to lead an armed party to the lodge under a false warrant. He has further stated that he was instructed by Mayor Ashford to ensure that Beckett Hawthorne, on his return from the false alarm Mr. Ashford had arranged on the high mountain, did not survive that return. The crowd made a sound. It was a low collective intake of breath, a sound like wind moving across a field. Gus Holloway turned back to the mayor. Cornelius Ashford, by federal warrant signed yesterday by Judge Marcus Whitfield of the Denver District Court, a man who has no friendship with Judge Hartwood and who has read every document in this case with his own 2 eyes, you are under arrest. The charges are embezzlement of company funds across the years, 1863 to 1866. Conspiracy to defraud, falsification of court warrants, conspiracy to commit murder in the matter of Becket Hawthorne in January of 1879, and murder in the first degree in the matter of Catherine Hawthorne and Theodore Hawthorne in December of 1866. Cornelius Ashford broke and ran. He came down off the platform in 3 quick steps and tried to push through the front of the crowd. A heavy-bearded timber hand named Ezra Bell, who had worked the Hawthorne mill for 15 years, stepped in front of him and folded his thick arms across his chest. Ashford shoved at him. Ezra did not move. 2 more timber men closed in from the sides. Ashford swung wild. One of his own deputies, a young man with a clean, honest face, stepped forward and quietly took the mayor by the elbow and would not let go. The crowd, the same crowd that had laughed at Adelaide 3 months earlier, did not protect their mayor. They drew back from him. They turned their faces away from him. An older man near the front spat into the snow at his feet. The community had moved. Ashford was still shouting. Marshal Holloway came down the platform steps and put the irons on his wrists. Spittle flew from the corner of his mouth. This is a frame. This is a lie. Catherine was always weak in the head. Theodore was a fool. They were going to ruin everything I had built, everything I had earned. I am the one who made this town. I am the one who— He cut himself off. He had said too much. He saw it in the marshal's face. He saw it in the faces of the crowd. He had not confessed in so many words. But he had said enough. The square had heard it. 100 witnesses had heard it. Adelaide watched all of this from the platform. She did not come down. She let Becket and Marshal Holloway and the timbermen do what needed doing. She stood very still with the journal closed in her hands. Then a strange thing happened. The same older woman in the dark shawl who had cried out earlier broke from the crowd and came up the platform steps. She was small and bent. Her face was lined like a winter apple. She had been one of the women who had laughed loudest the day Adelaide had stood on this platform in her thin coat. She came up to Adelaide and she did not speak at first. She took Adelaide's free hand in both of her own. Her hands were cold and worn. Her eyes were wet. Mrs. Hawthorne, forgive me. I was in this square that day. I laughed. God forgive me. I laughed. Adelaide looked at her a long moment. The old, hot anger she had carried for 3 months wanted to rise. She did not let it. She thought of her father who had taught her that grace given when it is not deserved is the only kind of grace that matters at all. She wrapped her free hand around the woman's 2 hands. There is nothing to forgive, ma'am. We were all of us deceived by one and the same man. You go in peace. The old woman wept openly then. She turned and went back down the steps and into the crowd, and other women gathered around her and held her up. Adelaide came down the steps last. She walked across the snow-packed square to the place where Cornelius Ashford stood in irons between 2 timbermen. He was no longer struggling. His face had gone gray and slack. The polish had gone out of him. He did not look up at her. She made him look up. Mayor Ashford. He raised his eyes. There was nothing in them now. No fight, no charm. Only the small, mean light of a man who has spent 12 years killing his own conscience and has no resources left in him. She did not raise her voice. She spoke clear and steady so the whole square could hear. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Thank you for showing me on that platform 3 months ago exactly who you were, before I knew you any better. Thank you for teaching me that not every man in fine clothes is a gentleman, and not every man on the high mountain is a beast. Sometimes the stone a man throws away turns out to be the diamond he had been hunting his whole life long. She turned away from him without waiting to see his face. She walked back to her husband. Becket Hawthorne was watching her come. He had not moved through any of it. He had stood beside the platform with his cane and his stiff right leg and his long bare coat, and he had let her speak. He had let her be the one to face the mayor at the end. He had understood that this moment belonged to her. When she reached him, he did not say anything. He simply lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. Then he turned with her and helped her up onto the gray mare. He swung up onto the black gelding. They rode out of Pine Ridge with the federal marshal at their side and a town that was no longer the same town behind them. 3 weeks after the arrest, the lawyer came up from Denver. His name was Edwin Pierce. He was a thin, gray-haired man of perhaps 60 with steady hands and a quiet voice. He had been the family lawyer of the Hawthorns for 40 years. He had been a young attorney at the time of Catherine's death. He had been the man she had been on her way to see in the first week of December 1866, when the avalanche had taken her. Edwin Pierce sat at the long oak table in the great room. He carried a leather case heavy with documents. Beckett, Adelaide, Holden, Rhett, and Henrietta gathered around the table. Toby sat on the floor near the fire with the bear pelt wrapped around him. "Beckett," Edwin Pierce said, "your father drew up a sealed addendum to his will in the autumn of 1866. He filed it with my office in Denver and gave instructions that it was not to be opened until, quote, the danger from Cornelius Ashford has been finally and fully removed." Those were his exact words. "I have kept that document in a private vault for 12 years and 3 months. It is time." He drew out a sealed envelope. He broke the wax. He read aloud. The sealed addendum did 3 things. First, it transferred to Beckett, Holden, and Rhett in equal shares the deed to a 5,000-acre tract of timberland in the Wyoming Territory that Theodore Hawthorne had purchased quietly in 1865 and had never registered under the company name. Cornelius Ashford had not known the land existed. The land had appreciated in 12 years to a value of over $300,000. Second, it revealed the existence of a private trust account at a bank in Boston. Theodore Hawthorne, anticipating that his brother-in-law might attempt some final desperate act, had moved $100,000 in gold into the Boston account in the autumn of 1866 under the name of a third-party trustee. The trust had compounded interest over 12 years. The current balance was just over $1 million. Third, it contained a letter, a single letter, written by Catherine Hawthorne in her clear school-teacher hand in the last week of November 1866, sealed and never sent, addressed simply, "To my future daughter, woman who will love my sons." Edwin Pierce handed the letter across the table to Adelaide. She opened it with hands that had begun to tremble. "To my future daughter, the woman who will love my sons, I do not know your name. I do not know the color of your hair or the country of your birth. I do not know whether I will live to see your face. But I have prayed for you since each of my boys was born, and I pray for you now as I write these words. Whoever you are when you came at last, my sons must have shown you who they are at the bottom of themselves. They must have, because if they had not, you would not be the kind of woman who would stand beside them through the storm I fear is coming. So I will write to you not as a stranger. I will write to you as a mother to a daughter. Take care of them. They have great, strong shoulders, but they carry hidden things, and they will need you to lay your hand on those shoulders in the dark hours. Love them. Be patient with the eldest who feels too much and says too little. Be soft with the middle whose laughter hides the wounds the world has put on him. Be plain with the youngest, who will heal others all his life and who will need someone to remember to heal him. Make a home in this valley. It is a good valley. Its bones are good. Plant gardens, light fires, bring children into it. A home is not the wood and the stone. A home is the people who choose to stay together when the storms come. May God bless you and keep you and shine his face upon you all the days of your life. Catherine Hawthorne. Adelaide laid the letter down on the table. She bowed her head into her hands. She wept without making any sound at all. Beckett rose from his chair and came around the table and put his arms around her. Holden stood up and came to stand at her one shoulder. Rhett came to her other shoulder. Henrietta laid a worn hand on the crown of Adelaide's bowed head. Toby came up from the floor and pressed his small face into the side of her dress. They stayed like that a long while, around the long oak table where Catherine Hawthorne had once sat with her 3 boys at her feet. It was Henrietta who told her later, on a quiet evening when the lodge was still and the lamps had been turned low, and the fire in the great hearth had burned down to its red coals. The pencil note in the bottom of the trunk, the one Adelaide had found her first night. Henrietta had written it. She had ridden down to Cheyenne the week before Adelaide arrived and slipped it into the trunk while it sat in the freight room of the railroad station, with the help of an old conductor who owed her a favor from 40 years back. She had not told Beckett. She had not told the brothers. She had been afraid after 12 years of waiting that the woman the eldest had chosen would turn back if she saw the full size of what waited for her. So Henrietta had written the warning and trusted that a woman strong enough to come west on her own would be strong enough to read those words and come anyway. Adelaide listened to the old housekeeper's confession. She did not say anything for a long while. Then she took Henrietta's worn hand in her own and held it. That was the end of that conversation, and the beginning of a friendship that would last until the day Henrietta Whitlock died 21 years later, in a bed in the upstairs room she had occupied for nearly all her years in that great log lodge. Now, folks, this is the part of the story I have always loved best. The part the old men around the stove in the general store back in my own boyhood used to lean in for. Because what comes next is not a single moment. It is a long unfolding. It is what happens when a family that has been hurt for 12 years finally lets itself rest. Cornelius Ashford was tried in Denver in the spring of 1879. The trial lasted 9 days. Catherine's journal was entered into evidence. Buford Crane, who had been stripped of his sheriff's badge the day after his confession, testified for the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 of Ashford's other former deputies, given immunity, came forward with accounts of bribes, intimidations, and quiet threats spread across a dozen years. Edwin Pierce testified about the original sealed will. Henrietta Whitlock, who had been in the lodge the night Catherine first wrote about her brother's thefts, testified to the truth of the journal. The jury was out 4 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentence was life imprisonment without possibility of parole served at the territorial prison at Denver. Ashford lived in that prison for 20 long years. When he finally walked out the gate in the autumn of 1898, he was 67 years old, and there was no one waiting on the road. His political allies had long since renounced him. The Denver Mercantile Bank had been broken up after federal investigation. He went to live in a cheap rooming house above a saloon. He took a small clerk's job copying out shipping manifests for a feed store. He drank. He grew thin. He spoke to no one. 2 years later, in the spring of 1900, the rooming house mistress found him cold in his bed. The county buried him in a pauper's grave outside Denver. There was no marker. When they cleaned out his small room, all that was found in his coat pocket was a single yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an old article from the Pine Ridge Gazette, dated November 1878, titled, "Bride Day Draws Large Crowd." The clipping had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were nearly worn through. He had never understood the truth that Pine Ridge had finally come to know. Now let me carry you forward 7 years. It is the summer of 1885. Silver Pine Valley is in full green leaf. The pines on the high slopes are dark and full. Wild roses bloom along the south porch. The river runs clear and full from the spring melt. There is the sound of children laughing somewhere out by the barns. Adelaide Hawthorne stands on the wide front porch of the lodge with her youngest child on her hip, Catherine Adelaide Hawthorne, called Cassie by everyone. 3 years old, honey blonde curls, her grandmother's name, and her grandmother's smile. She has a wooden horse in one fist and is reaching out her other small hand toward a butterfly that is just lifted from a porch railing. Out in the yard, Adelaide's firstborn, Theodore James Hawthorne, called Teddy, is 5 years old. He is running through the long grass with Tobias Greer at his heels. Toby is 15 now, tall and lean. He has been studying medicine with Rhett for 2 years and will leave in the fall for proper training back east at Philadelphia, the same school Rhett once attended. Teddy adores him. Wherever Toby goes, Teddy goes. Off to the side of the yard, Adelaide's mother, Phoebe Whitmore, who arrived from Boston 4 years ago in a wheeled chair coughing blood, and who is now, by some miracle of mountain air, And Rhett's careful medicine, walking slow and strong at 60, is tending the rose bushes she planted along the south porch. Her white hair is pinned up. Her face is brown from the sun. Adelaide watches her mother and feels every time she looks at her the small, grateful weight of a thing she had once thought she could never have. Adelaide's sister Iris is 15 now. She is teaching the early lesson at the small valley school that sits in the Cottonwood Grove down by the river. The school was Adelaide's idea. Beckett built it. 40 children of the timber families come to it every weekday morning. Iris has a gift for it. She is going to be a teacher all her life. Adelaide's brother Wesley is 17. He is out in the high pasture today, learning a horse with Holden. Holden married a Wyoming girl named Mary Jane Cross 3 years ago. They have a son. Wesley is uncle to that boy and dotes on him. Holden himself today is out riding the south pasture line with Wesley, teaching the boy to read horse tracks the way Beckett once taught Holden. The wild brother has not gone soft, but he has gone settled. Mary Jane brought a quietness to him that no man in the valley had ever thought to see. They named the boy Theodore after his grandfather, but the family calls him Young Theo to keep him separate from Teddy. Red is 36 years old this summer. He runs the Catherine Hawthorne Memorial Hospital at the edge of Pine Ridge. The first proper hospital in the territory opened in the autumn of 1882 with funds from the Wyoming timber sale. He has not married. He says he has not yet met the woman he can imagine spending 50 years beside. He is patient. He says she will come when she comes. He delivers babies. He sets bones. He buries the old. He is much loved. On the days when he comes home from Pine Ridge in the evening light, his amber eyes are tired but clear. Adelaide always has a plate warm for him at her table. Toby always saves him the chair beside him. Rhett Hawthorne is the only one of the 3 brothers who still sleeps under the lodge roof every night, and the family is the better for it. Henrietta Whitlock is 69 years old this summer. She still rises at 5. She still needs the bread. She moves slower than she once did. She has begun to teach Adelaide's mother her recipes and her ways. She says she is not yet ready to retire and might never be. She says retirement is for people who have run out of things they care about. Beckett Hawthorne comes up the porch steps now. He is 40 years old. His chestnut hair has begun to gray at the temples. He still rises at 4. He still splits wood when the mood takes him. He limps a little in cold weather. The right knee was never quite the same. He walks with a slight favor of his left side that Adelaide barely notices anymore. He comes up the steps and stands beside her. He does not speak. He does not need to. He puts his arm around her shoulders, and they watch their children in the long summer evening light. After a long while, he speaks. "You happy, Adelaide Hawthorne?" She turns her face up to him. "Happier than I ever once knew I could be." He nods slow. The sun goes down behind the western peaks. The light on the snow up high turns gold and then pink and then a deep silver blue. Down in the Cottonwood Grove, the schoolhouse bell rings to call Iris home for supper. Phoebe straightens from the rose bushes and shades her eyes with a brown, weathered hand. Toby and Teddy come pounding up across the yard, breathless and grinning, with the big collie dog bounding at their heels. Cassie squirms down off Adelaide's hip and toddles to meet them. Inside the great room of the lodge, Henrietta lights the lamps one by one along the long table. The fire is laid. The smell of supper drifts out the open door. From the locked room on the 3rd floor where the door is no longer locked, the sound of a piano comes drifting down through the warm summer air. It is Adelaide playing now. She plays every evening. She is teaching Cassie. The piece tonight is the same Chopin nocturne that was the first piece her father ever taught her in the parlor in Boston. The same piece Beckett had just begun after 12 years to teach himself again on the night Adelaide first knocked on the locked door. Friend, this is the picture I want to leave with you tonight. A great log lodge in a high valley with the lamps coming on. A man and a woman standing on a wide porch with their arms around each other. Their children laughing in the long grass. An old housekeeper laying the supper table. Two younger brothers riding home from work along the river path, a grandmother tending roses, a lost boy on his way to becoming a healer, a school full of children learning to read down in the cottonwoods, a piano after a long silence finding its voice again. This is what Adelaide Whitmore came west for, though she did not know it on the day she stood in her thin coat on the platform at Pine Ridge Depot with her trunk at her feet. This is what Beckett Hawthorne had been waiting 12 years to come home to, though he could not have named it on the cold morning he sat alone at his oak table with a fevered tremor in his right hand. This is what Catherine Hawthorne had prayed for in the careful schoolteacher hand of a mother riding across the grave to a daughter she would never meet. A home is not the wood and the stone. A home is the people who choose to stay together when the storms come. Up on the high ridge, the last of the sun goes off the snow. The stars begin to come out one by one over Silver Pine Valley. Inside the Great Lodge, Adelaide finishes the nocturne. The last soft chord moves out the open windows and into the gathering dark. Now you, yes, you sitting where you are sitting tonight, listening to an old man's voice tell an old story. Maybe you came up out of a hard winter once yourself. Maybe you carried a thing you could not prove for a long time. Maybe you have wondered more than once in your life whether the home you wanted was ever going to come. Maybe you have feared in the small hours of the morning what Beckett Hawthorne feared on the night he set down a trembling cup of cold coffee in an empty lodge. The fear of ending alone. If any of that has touched you, then I want you to hear me say this plain. Two broken people who fit together perfectly to make one whole. That is what Adelaide and Beckett were. That is what they made together up there in Silver Pine Valley. That is the story that has been told around 1,000 stoves in 1,000 small mountain towns for going on 50 years now. That is the story that grandmothers tell to granddaughters when the granddaughters get to wondering whether love will ever find its way to them. It does, friend, sometimes late, sometimes after long winters, sometimes after we have already given up on it, but it does. And the small Boston bride that Cornelius Ashford laughed at on a wooden platform in the cold of November 1878, the girl he tried to sell off cheap in front of his whole town, the girl he expected to be dead in the snow before Christmas, that girl became the lady of Silver Pine Valley, the mother of the next Hawthorne generation, the wife who saved her husband from a ravine and her family from a thief. The woman who walked into a town that had laughed at her and walked out of that town 3 months later with the man who had laughed loudest in irons at her feet. She did not crack. She did not run. She did not stop loving the men who had sworn to stand for her on the day they made her one of their own. She just kept walking, one careful step at a time, through the snow and through the storm and through the long, quiet years that came after. Until next time, friend, keep your fire burning bright. Keep your powder dry. And keep your heart open even when the wind comes hard out of the north. Because somewhere out there on a road you have not yet traveled in a valley, you have not yet seen the diamond you are looking for, may be looking for you too. This has been Marcus from the campfire. Good night, friends. Good night.